Welcome to the RD2B podcast. Each week we sit down with a different registered dietitian nutritionist to showcase the diversity of opportunity in the dietetics profession. Our aim is to dismantle the notion that there is a traditional career path. I'm Carl Barnes, the registered dietitian behind the scenes of RD2B.
And I am Jenna Warnock, the RD2B host. Our RD guests share their stories, career paths, and advice to help students like us succeed in the profession. Welcome back to another week of the RD2B podcast. I'm your host, Jenna, and this week we are kind of starting another mini series with Dr. Jenna Stedman. So we had her on the podcast previously, and she talked about her wonderful, unique path towards kind of carving out her own unique niche in cognitive performance nutrition. So it's not just performance nutrition that we hear all about. She was kind of able to take one step further based off of her own unique passions and dive even deeper into the cognition side of things when it comes to performance. And so she is the director of cognitive performance nutrition for Master Nutrition Lab. She holds a doctorate in clinical nutrition and is also a certified specialist in sports dietetics. And so after our first episode, we were like, we love each other. Let's go ahead and just dive even deeper into some topics about cognitive nutrition because it's one of those, I feel like, hot topics. And given Dr. Stedman's expertise, we really wanted to dive deeper into seeing what more could be said about it given her expertise. And so, Dr. Stedman, thank you so much for joining us again. Where in this episode, we're going to talk all about cognitive performance as far as like how students could prepare, how we can use it as nutrition students to our own advantage. Because, we spend so many days studying it and so many days immersed in it. How do we actually use it to our own advantage as the up and coming nutrition professional? So thank you again for sitting down to talk about it.
Thank you so much for having me back. I'm so excited to be here again.
Yes, and so for the people who maybe hear like CPE, because I remember when we were brainstorming what the second episode was going to be about, I saw you write like CPE, and I was like, I've never heard of that before. And so kind of first laying the groundwork of in your field and just in your expertise, what is a CPE and like what are some examples?
So I made it up because because I kept writing, over and over again, articles, other podcasts, like all these other things. I kept saying cognitive performance experience or cognitive performance events, and I was like, I got to just abbreviate it. This is exhausting. Like, I just anytime I can abbreviate something and make my writing a little more simplified, I try to do that. But it kind of caught on a little bit. I was like, okay, well, a CPE, right? Any cognitive performance event is it's different for everyone, right? But it really is anytime our brain is kind of put to the challenge, right? So as students, that's exams or presentations or projects or anything like that. For athletes, right? It's the game, it's the race, the obstacle course, whatever we're performing in. But even outside of that, it could be an audition or a performance or an interview. Like every human being will experience CPEs at some point in their, athletic or like regular career. So it's something everyone with a brain will experience.
Yeah, and I think especially because when I first heard about what it was when we were like drafting out these questions, I was like, even the awareness of it, I feel like goes a long way. Like going into something, just being like, this is going to take a lot of brain power. I feel like there is a lot of just power to that awareness in and of itself, but also just again with your knowledge and even coining the term itself and knowing the expertise behind it. Why do you think it is so important to be aware of what these CPEs are in advance, especially for dietetic students?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, just knowing that you have a point in time where you are going to need, heightened focus, heightened attention, heightened memory recall. Um, Being aware of that time and being able to better prepare for it. I mean, I think we can all argue like, better grades, better memory, like, that all makes us better students. Like tests make us all better learners in a sense because we really are putting our knowledge into that test, and so being any more prepared for that, not just in the knowledge but how your brain is going to perform in that is really very valuable. I didn't realize it until later in my career, but it hadn't quite clicked for me until later in high school, which was kind of too bad. I did okay. I did fine in I've always been a B student. I did fine in high school, but like I didn't realize kind of the test taking strategies and thing like this until I took the SATs in high school. And again, right, I did okay, but like I had big dreams. I was like, I got to do better than this. And so I actually, my aunt actually tutored me in this, and we weren't just studying the material. She was talking to me all about like, the test taking environment and what you're doing the night before and all of these things. And it didn't really dawn on me until like college. I was like, oh yeah, I should still be doing those things. Like we should always be thinking about not just, the knowledge of like, memorizing everything going into the test and how to regurgitate that information in the correct way, but also, right, how our brain is formulating all of this and making those connections.
Yeah, and I think it ties really beautifully into, I feel like, how we're certain education systems are raised. It's a lot of just memorize, regurgitate. But then when you actually go to take exams or have these CPEs that directly apply to a credential that you get, say the RD exam, for example, where it's heavy in critical thinking or synthesizing. And there is some, again, you have to know what vitamin D is. Like there's a level of
Yeah,
knowledge that you just have to know. But I
absolutely.
feel like with CPEs in the dietetics profession, it's even more important to have it on the radar where, again, the whole context dependent of it's not just memorizing. Well, yes, that's a component. It's how do all of these pieces tie together? Because it's a critical thinking point that I just recorded an episode last week, and we talked about the importance of critical thinking in dietetics. And I feel like a good chunk of CPEs is greatly tied to cognitive performance experiences just throughout the whole spectrum, whether you're taking a test all the way to that RD exam.
Oh yeah.
Um, and when it comes to, because you talked about your own experience where in high school, you kind of had how you typically went through your exams, the SAT, but then how you went through a new process of learning, pretty much learning how to learn.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And when it kind of comes to laying the groundwork of what you've maybe seen with your own patients or just what you've seen with your own experience, how do you see CPEs most commonly handled? Because there's a lot of stress accompanied to it. There's a lot of different things that are typically layered with it. So how do you see the normal person handle it?
At least in my own practice, right? My patients, and I could say probably a lot of my colleagues too, but there tends to be kind of this range of either like complete stress and panic, right? Or the other end of this is like almost this delusion of like there, not that to sense that like the test isn't happening, but like we're not stressed, everything is fine. And I definitely ended up on the latter end of that spectrum of like everything is fine. I probably know everything and it'll just be what it is. And I don't know if really either ends of that, that stress spectrum there are really helpful, right? They're not going to be helpful on day of the test, right? If you're stressed out of my mind, that's a huge distraction. Like if you can't if you're so worried about the outcome of the test, you can't even focus on what's currently happening, right? And then on the other end too, right? You so, out of touch thinking that that everything will just be fine. You went to every class, so you should know everything. Like neither one of those are really preparing you for what's going on. And thinking too, not just about like exactly what you said, right? We're just memorizing lots of facts and regurgitating them. Understanding what critical thinking model they're trying to, right, teach us, so that if you master that, you're not just going into that test like regurgitating facts, right? You're going in thinking, okay, understand how this process or this mechanism or whatever, is happening. I know now how to figure out this. I know this formula. I know this, how this, this process or something works. So going into the test, understanding those critical thinking um habits, and I don't know how to describe it, but like going into that with those types of thinking strategies, I think is kind of that happy medium of understanding, okay, yes, there is probably a little bit of stress, right? It's a test. It's you know um some kind of evaluation or a presentation, but also knowing that, you have the foundation to do very well. I think there needs to be kind of that happy medium of, because I tend to see kind of either end of the spectrum there. And neither one really prepares us very well. And I can relate, being in the delusion land kind of end of it. Because I would go in and I'd say, "Oh, I've read everything, like I can do this," but it wasn't quite enough as I had found out myself.
All I can think of is the amount of times that I've had a textbook in front of me and I'm like, this is just common sense. It's just common sense. Like it'll make sense. And then when
It'll
you
make
actually
sense on the
take it,
test.
yeah, exactly. And then it's like, sure. But I think one question too that kind of arises, you were talking about these two extremes, the ignorance is bliss, delulu, as we like to say, versus the heightened stress of I didn't have enough time. How am I going to like get everything handled? Things like
Yeah.
that. And then how you were able to have that experience with your aunt kind of tutoring you as to like kind of restructuring your mind as to learning how to learn. And when it comes to maybe directions or pieces of advice for that, because again, this podcast is geared towards dietetic students, and particularly whether they're studying for a community nutrition exam, they're studying for their RD exam. For those that really want to optimize their time preparing for a CPE, do you recommend students like finding a tutor so that they can learn how to learn, or do you recommend certain books that they read? Do you recommend any specific directions for if a student is listening and they're like, I am definitely on one of those, like I'm on either end of the spectrum, how do I find myself more in the middle? Do you
Oh
have
yeah.
any direction that you recommend they take?
Yes. So what worked very well for me and a lot of my peers was identifying what classes, and this is right different every semester, what classes you can handle on your own, right? And then what classes you need either a study group or like an upper year tutor or like something like that for. That's going to be probably our most efficient use of time, right? Because you're gonna see that every semester, right? You're gonna take, 3, 4, 5 classes, whatever it is, and you're gonna be able to look at that list and be like, okay, I'm really good at this. I've got this, under control, right? Like I was very good at biology. I did not need a tutor for that one. But then you get, higher up throughout your course load, and you find, you get to like nutritional biochem. That's one that's really helpful to have a study group because you can talk through the processes together and you can understand, and you don't even, sometimes you don't, oftentimes, right? We don't know what we don't know. So you hear your peers' questions and you talk through things, and that's a very helpful class, right? To have some support for. Other classes, right? And I find sometimes even as like my freshman, sophomore classes, it was more helpful to seek out a tutor because there was no like base level this. Like you take chemistry in high school, so different than chemistry in college, right? So like that's another, right? That's a course where it is helpful to have someone who has already experienced it say, this is important, this is how we understand this I remember from a like they can help you kind of through that course. And then there's others too, like, you know, I hate saying this, but this is honestly advice. There's some courses too that you're just not going to put a lot of effort into, and you have to prioritize. I know there's a lot of like straight A, type A, like future dietitians out there. You're that's wonderful and that's amazing for you. But if we're talking about reducing our stress load and being good at the nutrition stuff, the electives are not the place to like stress out over. Like I remember I had to take like drawing 401 or something like that as like a sophomore. Like I'm not putting like 20 hours a week into drawing. I'm not an artist. I just needed to check off that course. So like no, I'm not like stressing out over a drawing project. I'm going to put more effort into, the community nutrition presentation that I have coming up that week. So understanding too where your efforts need to be, that is also going to be a helpful thing. Like don't worry about drawing class or whatever else you have to take, like gen eds, discovery courses, whatever your school's calling them. Like do the best you can, of course. I don't want to tell anyone to like tank a course because GPA is right, will absolutely help in terms of getting internships and graduate programs and things like that. But also too, in the very long run, it does not help you to spend a ton of time on an elective, right? That, while yes, it counts towards your GPA, is not helping you become a dietitian. I have used my drawing skills 0 times in my career. But for other ones, it's perfectly, there's a lot of great, gen eds out there that, everyone has to take. But absolutely, I mean, finding either study groups or tutor, like every college has, tutors, upperclassmen tutors that are happy to do that. And finding really any of those resources that are gonna help you in the more difficult courses, it's definitely gonna be worth it.
Yeah, and I think you do a great balance of, I mean, me personally, who was and still is a type A person going through undergrad, kind of challenging a lot of that preconceived thinking towards school, where it's I need to put 110% into all of my classes no matter what. Where now that with me being in grad school, it's not that, oh, I've chosen to have that frame of thinking. You kind of get forced to have that frame of thinking. So I encourage to do that preemptively so that then when you transition to a time where your course load is you are simply running out of the 156, 158 hours during the week to allocate towards everything, to where you'd much rather just in undergrad when you're going through your classes be like, I don't need to worry about this philosophy class. I don't
Yeah.
need like, and another thing too is you're also balancing the, yeah, care about your grades, but only to the point that they need to be cared about. And I think the application requirements for lots of graduate schools in dietetics and dietetic internships speak to that as well, because a lot of times they have a DPD coursework GPA
Yes.
requirement
Yep.
and then a general GPA requirement.
Yeah.
And so programs themselves also recognize that they would much rather you allocate your cognitive performance experiences towards the things that matter, like your DPD coursework, community nutrition, that example, things like that, than compared to that drawing class. And I can just absolutely say from personal experience that if you don't practice that sort of like organization of time early, you will reach a point where you will be forced to. And I think with being type A, we always like to plan things. So I think this is something that can be planned for, just
Oh, absolutely. No, I absolutely agree. And that was something that I did do because I was also, remember, I was a transfer student. So I wasted my freshman year rowing in Boston, which was amazing and wonderful, but not helpful in my career. And so when I transferred, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to spend, 5 more years trying to play catch up here. So I did my first day there. I printed out a list of all of the required, you need all the DPD courses. And then, I made an additional list of all the electives. And so I highlighted which ones I was going to need probably some more help with. And then I basically color coded everything. And I highlighted the ones that I felt like I could handle, like intro, like nutrition assessment, like all like kind of the introduction ones. I felt like I could handle those. They're like, I'm going to say nutritional biochem a bunch of times in this. That's the best example of like help. We need some help in that one. We also, I'll tell everyone who's in school right now, everyone survives nutritional biochem. We all survive it and it will be okay. And then I went through electives and I picked electives very strategically, right? I did what I had to do to graduate. I was not picking really challenging electives. I was not taking a language like because I knew myself. I knew that was not my priority. For other people who write dual major or you want to minor in something or you love another top, that's wonderful. Absolutely do that. I knew for myself that was not a priority that I could handle at all. So I picked things like drawing and like just what I needed to do to graduate because nutrition was my priority. So that's another really important thing is really think about what your end goal is because end goal is not just the dietetic exam, right? You do need to set yourself up for a really good career.
Yeah, and I think that's a great stress management technique as well as going back to big picture of not to get existential, but being like, what
Right.
is all of this for?
Yep.
Like, you're taking your DPD classes for a reason, and you're still taking those electives for a reason, but it's
Yes.
paying it the energy that it deserves to get you from point A to point B in whichever way that's supposed to fit for it. But I really enjoy having these types of conversations and having these types of moments because it helps, I believe, put things into perspective for nutritional biochem can confirm it is pain, but we get through it.
Yeah.
And it's not being afraid to ask for help and planning ahead of time the classes that you will anticipate needing to ask for help too, because then again, it'll be less of a kind of frantic, stressy thing where it's like, oh, I have an exam in a week. Now I need to start reaching out for help. Now I need to start like studying or things like that. Now I'm prepping. So I think this is a nice marriage between managing type A's expectations towards, the energy in certain classes, but also leaning into that planning skill and strength that a lot of type A's have. And it's very apparent in the dietetics profession. Um, and now gearing this more towards to ways that, again, to further help dietetic students, because we talked about this too at the last episode, how much eating, which I mean, students already see this, how eating does affect cognition and eating does affect performance. But it's more so that's said, and then people kind of carry on. It's like, yeah, we know that it affects it. Like, yeah, sugar makes you crash, and eating fruits and vegetables make you feel good. And that's about the level of rigor that, at least what I've heard going through school. But when it comes to actually applying it, there's minimal direction or pieces of advice. But this was something that we talked about of something being of interest to. And I really enjoy these new directions because we have a lot of conversations on this podcast just hearing about guests and their journeys and guests and like advice that students can glean from these individual people. But I really like taking the direction of this episode as what are applicable tools, directions, and things that students themselves can utilize in the nutrition realm that can help them succeed outside of advice from successful dietitians. Because while that's super successful and super helpful, it's also wanting to, help out in other ways. And so when it comes to eating patterns and just general modes of eating, this is a very new like field and exposure to me. So I'm also open to just whatever direction you want to take it, but just eating patterns and eating in general. What types of recommendations would you have for dietetic students when preparing for these types of cognitive performance events? Like, and you can start from whatever direction or angle you want to go, like whether it's just types of foods from the beginning, you have the experience in it. So whatever direction you think it should go, I'm all ears.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So before I say what we're aiming to do, right? Most important to understand is we're not doing anything that adds extra stress to our plate, right? To our plate, okay? But also be aware of, right, what kind of foods you have available. And again, we're not adding stress trying to track down certain foods. So if I'm talking about a food and you're like, there's no way I'm going to be able to find that thing, or I don't have access to that food, don't create stress for yourself and try to track it down or force yourself to eat something that you don't like. So be aware, right? If we're right eating in a dining hall, right? Most dining halls are going to have some good variety day to day for the most part. Or right, if we're eating at home and you're commuting to school, or if you are eating on your own, right? Maybe you're an upperclassman, you're living in an apartment and you are feeding yourself. That's even more fun because you get to go to the grocery store and start learning how to do this and how to feed yourself. Fun fact about being an adult, you have to feed yourself every day for the rest of your
It
life. Good
doesn't
luck.
stop.
It never stops. So, what we're aiming for, and this is ideally every single day, but even more so the couple weeks, 2, 3 weeks leading up to finals, big presentation, like anything like this. We're looking for what I call a brain powered plate. And it's pretty much like any other plate that you're going to see, any other plate model. We're looking for some kind of lean protein source somewhere in there. We're looking for hopefully a higher fiber starch or like a good carbohydrate. And then we're looking for produce, fruits and or vegetables. And I genuinely don't care what foods you're picking or what combinations of things or even the portions of, right? Because we're not talking about energy usage. We're not running. We're not lifting, we're not talking about weight management, anything like that. We're really just talking about food groups. So in this idea too, I want everyone to be as aware as they can, right? Use those intuitive eating skills. Listen to your hunger cues and understand, okay, am I really hungry today and I need to eat a lot, or I'm not as hungry today and maybe I don't need as much energy. That is a piece that you will either figure out on your own or you will work with a dietitian, right? As dietetic students, like this is your chance in school to kind of experiment with these things and figure it out, kind of what this feels like, because this is something that you're going to be counseling on someday. But aside from energy usage, if we're aiming for those, three kind of major food groups there, plus some healthy fats, that's kind of our extra there. We are going to most likely be getting all of the kind of foundational nutrients that we need, right? Lean proteins with, reducing that saturated fat as much as we can, is going to give you, those good amino acids for neurotransmitters and things like that in your brain. It's even better if we can pick some fish. The recommendation is 3 times a week-ish, and that counts as like tuna fish. You don't have to get fancy and like make salmon at your house or anything like that, but like look in the dining hall almost always has like tuna fish or like something like that. Something like that, three-ish servings per week is typically what we're aiming for. When we're looking at carbohydrate starches, higher fiber the better, right? Because that higher fiber is going to give you that slower release of sugars, release of energy throughout the day, rather than, right, if we eat candy bar or something and you get that spike and then crash, spike and then crash throughout the day, that's less optimal. Your brain wants a consistent source of glucose throughout the day, right? So if we're looking for that, where our higher fiber carbohydrates are going to give you that. So look for potatoes, beans. Everyone forgets about beans. Whole rices, whole grain breads, anything like that. Bagels. Don't be afraid of bagels. Don't be afraid of pasta. Like any kind of whole grain source of that. Those are going to be your good starches. So load up on those two. And then produce. That's the easy one because every single fruit and vegetable is healthy for you. So that's the really easy one there. You can't go wrong. Pick literally any fruits or vegetables you like. And I always tell people too, right? If you hate cooked spinach, try it raw. If you hate it raw, try it cooked. Like there's all different combinations of things and ways to prepare stuff that you can find that you like it. If you find right all form you still hate spinach, fine, eat kale, eat eat literally, all the other vegetables. If you don't like something, you can usually find other foods that are going to be close enough that you can eat that instead. So you don't have to force yourself to eat kale in the name of health. If you hate it, that's totally fine. We can eat other foods. But in terms of brain health too, and brain performance, we're looking for our most antioxidant rich fruits and vegetables. So this is going to be our dark leafy greens. Find at least one that you like. All of our berries, right? Our dark berries, blueberries, pomegranates, all the berries, those are going to be most helpful. So when we're looking at produce, aiming for those as best you can. When we're looking at healthy fats, I generally don't have to counsel people on fats. I think all Americans get plenty. But if we're, trying to sneak in, right? Most things are going to be right cooked in olive oil. If you get some avocado here and there, like we usually can kind of piece together enough healthy fats throughout the week. When we're looking at snacks, we generally want to aim for like a 2 food group kind of snack, right? So we're looking for either like a protein and a starch or a protein and a produce or something like that. So if we're looking at like a really easy one, especially in college, is like trail mixes. I lived on trail mix all through high school and college. I always had a huge bag of it in my pack. It always spilled. I always had it with me because it was dried fruit and nuts. There you go. You got antioxidants, you got healthy fats. There's a tiny bit of protein. Like it was a good combination and it kept me going throughout the day. So if we're aiming for, right, that brain-powered plate, breakfast, lunch, dinner, hopefully, 2 food group snacks in between each of those meals. If we're doing that most of the time, most days, then you're going to be getting for the most part, you're going to be getting all the nutrients that you need. So that's the weeks leading up to. And then, of course, don't forget about hydration. That's always important too. Different for every person, but knowing that, you need a hydrated brain is going to be a happier brain. Stay hydrated, especially the weeks leading up to. Day of, that's the day, especially that morning, to really load up on, right? Getting some extra omega-3s, getting some extra antioxidants, making sure you're hydrated, things like that. Some good fiber as well, right? We don't want to just eat a bunch of berries that are going to digest in 2 minutes and then, you're going to be hungry in an hour and the test is starting in 5 minutes. And so getting, like a good like whole grain bagel with avocado on it and then like a bunch of berries and I don't know, like an egg or something, like put that on top, like making it as, a wholesome breakfast as possible while trying to hit as many food groups as you can. For those who feel like they can't eat before tests, right? And I have this a lot of times with like my athletes who are training in the mornings. They're like, I can't train with anything in my stomach, right? Can't take a test with anything in my stomach. Getting at the very least, and this really is bare minimum, like some juice in the morning. Just give your brain some hydration and some carbohydrates. That really, truly is the very bare minimum. From there, I would love it to see, and this is what I try to do with a lot of my athletes, is actually training the gut, training the body over time to, right, increase that food. So maybe first semester, we're really nervous at college, get some juice morning of the test, right? Start with that throughout the semester. Make that normal for you. Then, right, add a granola bar, add a banana, like add things over time and train your gut to actually, right, accept and utilize a little bit more food without making our stomachs a little bit too nervous.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And then now, because I think that's a great foundation too. And I feel like there may be some people where they're like, well, yeah, we learned about the food groups and yeah, we learned about the plate and blah, 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 blah. But I think this is a really great time just for people to do a self-assessment of, okay, but how much am I actually like because I feel like the reason why it's important to talk about it in a dietetics lens is we learn about it so much.
But then
Then
we don't
it's
do it. We
yeah.
learn about all of this and then we sit there with our coffee and we're like, why am I getting a C on this test?
And
It's like
then
saying your brain has no carbs in it. Come on.
and then that was my next question and
Yeah.
follow-up is caffeine. Where
Caffeine.
does
I love talking about caffeine.
And so where does caffeine fall into all of this?
Caffeine is such a cool, amazing thing when it's used appropriately, right?
Yeah.
And I experienced this with, because you learned in our last episode, I worked for the military for a long time. So we tested this out. I had many soldiers kind of testing out their caffeine limits. So technically, regular humans, okay, we have the caffeine limit of about 300 to 400 milligrams per day. All right. So smaller adults, somewhere in the 300 range, larger adults, probably somewhere in the 400 range. Um, Technically, we do have some studies that have like approved higher amounts of caffeine for very short periods of time. And that was in a tactical setting. And that was for like a specific mission or something where they were, undergoing like overnights and things like that. Totally separate thing that does not apply to any dietetic students out there. So don't think that that's an excuse at all. But so what we're aiming for, probably most of us are probably going to be in that like 350 kind of range. Timing your caffeine is going to be helpful. And also, too, in that, mimicking the study environment as best you can. So I didn't realize this till it was like later in college, but I actually learned this in high school and it didn't dawn on me till like 4 years later. But mimicking your study environment so as best you can. So if you are studying and you always study with a coffee, with a green tea, with an energy drink or something like that, like make sure, right, if that's how you're practicing, right, studying with caffeine in your system, then you need to be taking the test with similar amounts of caffeine in your system, right? Because that's what your brain has practiced. Same thing too, right? If you're always studying in the evening after dinner, then maybe you need to practice whatever that dinner is, having something very similar for breakfast morning of the test. So thinking about the timing of our food and how we're practicing this. So this, right, and then this is how it carries over to athletic performance is that we don't want to show up on race day and try a new food. That's usually not going to go very well. You want to practice, right? If you always eat a banana before your run, we're going to eat a banana on race day, right? If you always have a huge meal 2 hours before, we're going to do that on race day. So it's the same thing with tests, right? If you are always testing with a certain amount of caffeine in your system, and this doesn't have to be exact, you can, it's an estimate. But if you always test with a certain amount of caffeine in your system, mimic that on test day. So you want to try to get things as close as possible and don't
And
go
I
overboard.
Yeah, and I think that that's actually so helpful. And the reason why I asked is, and I find this kind of funny and ironic, is we talked about this too last episode, but I took a nutritional neuroscience class this past semester, and that
Amazing.
and it was so in everything that you talked about, it does apply to it, like the antioxidants, the fish, the whole grains, fiber, all of that. It's exactly all of that. I was like, I learned about all those things. But anyways, during our exams, it was very much like nutritional biochem, where would have these diagrams, and it would be like explain this process starting here and point all of these arrows to end up here.
Yeah.
So it was a cognitive performance event for each exam that we would take. And what I noticed is I would study in the morning right after I had caffeine and breakfast. And I'm pretty sensitive to caffeine, so I typically am like, okay, I only have my coffee in the morning The class, however, in my exams are in the afternoon. And
Yep.
there was one, and I noticed like my exams were pretty fine at the beginning, but there was one day where I was exhausted, like my sleep was terrible. And I was like, for me to just be present, I need to have my typical cold brew before my exam. I did like, and exactly to what you said, having the similar caffeine in your system when you're studying, I felt the same like feeling. I felt the same, if not better, with the caffeine fresh in my system. But again, because I was using it methodically, like even though I didn't have the knowledge of using it intentionally to do better on the exam, I was just like, I need to be awake.
Oh
um,
yeah.
but I didn't realize until you described, hey, mimicking the similar environment that you had with studying with the exam, I probably felt better taking it even though I was a little sleep deprived, was because I was mimicking the caffeine levels in my system. And I got like, that was actually, yeah, my best exam grade was what was my, again, it's kind of it's a double-edged sword because it's like I was sleep deprived, so I encourage people sleeping, but also the mimicking of the caffeine and the mimicking of, I think, nutrients in general.
Yeah.
And that ties me over to supplements because I think supplements is another common thing that dietitians, I mean, even with students, they're going to have to deal with talking about with patients and clients in the future. So, in general, just supplements in this type of space, how do you can even treat this as a double-edged sword where how do you approach it with your patients or clients? And then how should students approach it for themselves?
Oh yeah. So students out there, supplements is more in our realm than any other provider out there. So absolutely learn this material and completely own it because you're gonna get in some fights with chiropractors. I swear to God, like the amount of fights I've started with chiropractors is so bad. But seriously though, like it is absolutely it is in our realm. Own this material, know it very well for our own use as students. There really is not a single like nootropic is what they're called, right? Brain enhancing supplement out there on the market. You're going to see a lot of like proprietary blends and magical formulas and all these things, and we really don't have any evidence to support any of them. There are a couple that we do though. So creatine is actually just the magical world of creatine. For decades, we've known that it helps with physical performance. We are now, in the last few years, learning now that it helps with cognitive performance as well. And fun fact, it can actually help with resilience against TBIs. So if you're in a concussion sport, I always recommend daily creatine. It's just like the 3 to 5 grams, like it's nothing crazy, but creatine is something we get from our protein foods anyways. It's something that our body makes, but we know that taking extra creatine does these extra things, which is amazing. And it's usually a pretty cheap supplement too. Make sure it's third party tested. Supplements are not regulated like our food is. Always make sure everything is third party tested, informed choice or NSF certified for sport, whatever it needs to be. But creatine is definitely a good one. So if you have the budget for it, that is certainly one that is safe to take, and it can be, certainly a very cool brain supplement that can help. We have some like hinting of like kind of like some medium research on things with like ashwagandha and like lion's mane mushroom, like all of these like there are a couple like herbs and mushrooms and things. I haven't seen anything conclusive saying like this is definitely something everyone needs to be taking, like we've seen with creatine and caffeine. Like there's actual evidence showing that this is doing good stuff for our brain. So I'm not really sold on anything else. Those are the two that really stand out in terms of supplementing past food and nutrition. But you will see, I mean, things come out in the market every day. So we will see more and more of these magical nootropic blends of all kinds of things that claim that they do great stuff for our brain, and they just really don't. Not
And then
yet.
what? No, yeah. And I think it also boils down to just what the evidence says,
Yes.
because I feel like there's a lot of things that are currently out being tested where it's like it's neither good nor bad, but that doesn't mean that I should recommend it or that we should recommend it. Um, but one thing too is have you told or educated or have talked at all about medium chain triglycerides or like MCT oil or anything like that? Like where does that fall?
A little bit. So anything really that we can kind of get from diet anyways, I always try to eat the food for as much as we can first. So, and I have a few examples of this. So like things like, Any of our fish oils or like our, healthy fat kind of supplements, vitamin Bs, like there's a multitude of nutrients that we know support good brain health. I try to get them from food as much as we can first before we go jump to expensive supplements. For some of my athletes, right? Like I have one who is recovering from an injury right now. We need to be getting, some decent amount of omega-3s. They're doing 3 servings of fish every week, but on the days they're not doing fish, they're taking a fish oil supplement. So they're getting kind of like that daily dose, but half of it is from food. So there are certainly options in that where you can kind of mix those ideas of like, let's try to do food as much as we can, but then supplement kind of where the diet is possibly lacking. That's also a protocol. I just made it up. So we don't have a lot. We don't have like a dose or like like specific recommendations for omega-3s. So that probably actually wasn't my best example because I made that one up, but it's working and it's working and it's not going to be something that like we're doing long term. Like they're in a healing phase right now. Once they're back training, like we're going to probably back off the fish oil and just stick to the 3 fish a week. But I mean, you could do that with, any number of supplements, right? Like we test for vitamin D, right? They're low for a period. You take a vitamin D supplement as adjust lifestyle, right? Hopefully get some more sunlight, get some more, foods that are maybe fortified with vitamin D, you come off of that supplement. So the goal is really never to supplement every day for the rest of our life. It's used as a tool, hopefully for a short period of time.
Precisely. And it's used
Yeah.
as a supplement to supplement for a
Yes.
time being.
Yeah.
And I think I just have one more comment or question when it comes to caffeine because you mentioned energy drinks, and I feel like energy drinks also, similar to supplements, they have these proprietary blends and they have these like, look at all these fancy things, and you're having 1,000% of your B12 because why not? And just all of these, because all of these types of things. But I feel like this is just for students in general because I also saw this in my classes this past semester, especially
Yeah.
but people are having lots of different energy drinks.
Yeah.
And they are all marketed a little differently, but a lot of them just have these proprietary blends. When it comes to energy drink consumption, is there any specific guidelines or recommendations that you have for, because we do talk about how caffeine's helpful for cognition and for cognitive improvement. However, too much of a good thing, I feel like is something too. So when it comes to the recommended intake that you would tell maybe your student athletes or just students in general for consuming energy drinks, because you gave that milligram, like you gave the caffeine milligram recommendation. Is it pretty much, hey, as long as they consume, like it's okay if they have energy drinks every day, as long as their overall caffeine's below that 300-400, or
Technically, yes, right? Because I mean, that is a daily amount. But I should also preface to say, while I'm not a sleep expert by any means, know for a fact, sleep will help you more than an energy drink will. So if you are at the end of the night and you think, wow, I just need to power through this last chapter or do whatever, like yes, reviewing material is helpful, but that extra hour of sleep is going to be so much more helpful to your sleep is the very best thing that you can do for your brain. There is not a nutrient in the world that compares to a good night's sleep. So getting enough sleep is always going to be more important than reviewing everything one more time. So I'll preface by saying that. So yes, technically we could have up to that 300 milligrams of caffeine daily. Something to consider though, the human body, we do build a tolerance to caffeine over
yeah.
time. So, right, like we all remember, like you start drinking coffee, you start drinking tea, and then you need two, and then you're on energy drinks, and it kind of spirals because your body builds a tolerance to it. So, like my athletes do, we have to cycle off of it every once in a while. It feels horrible, and no one actually does this, but this is the correct way to do it. So, if I have an athlete coming in, we like, all right, we're writing, a 12. They come in with a 12-week training cycle, and they are max testing or doing, whatever racing at the end of it. During those 12 weeks, we're using a specific dosage of caffeine pre-workout 30 to 40 minutes before. We're racing or testing or doing whatever with that same amount. And then we're cycling off of it. Zero caffeine for 5 days so that we can repeat that. We don't have to jack up the caffeine every time we're repeating that process. So technically, students, this is what we should be doing. And I remember learning this in school and thinking, oh, that kind of works perfectly because you can utilize like a safe amount of caffeine throughout the semester, take all your tests, and then during your semester break, no caffeine. And I remember telling this to like my friends, and they were like, that's completely insane. Like that feels terrible. I'm not doing it. So actually, I don't know a single human being that does this correctly, but that is textbook. That's how we should be cycling caffeine like that. Because I personally, I don't like to see anyone really consuming any energy drinks that have more than like 200 milligrams. Because when you get to that point, when you have 200 milligrams in one drink, it's really easy to grab a second one. And then you're over or you're at your limit in two
Mhm.
drinks. So if we're utilizing safe caffeine, I prefer to see the brands that have less than 200. That way, if it's an emergency and we need two, like you have that buffer room, right? A lot of people also forget, like, oh yeah, I had coffee this morning and now I'm having an energy drink in the afternoon. And now I'm up late studying and I'm going to have a third. Like, you're definitely past your limit and you forgot about your coffee in the morning. So, being hyper aware, and that is one thing. Like, I tell people, you don't need to track like calories or protein, like any of these things throughout the day to be helpful. Caffeine is one you need to track meticulously because you should not be going over that. We see people in the emergency room all the time for like massive caffeine dosages. And sometimes they don't even know they're doing it.
Yeah, and
It's
I
really
feel like,
scary.
yeah, and it perpetuates also the stress and anxiety that a lot of people feel
Hmm.
preparing for these CPEs and just studying. And it kind of, if you're already stressed or anxious, caffeine can ramp up the emotions and things that you're already feeling. And so the last part of this episode that I really want to cover that I think, regardless of nutrition students' prior knowledge in nutrition, because again, this is all a lot of great foundational work, especially not just around food and the types of foods to be eating, but also caffeine, creatine, just how to handle supplements in general, but just overall stress management, because also how students respond to stress is different. Some tend to overeat, some just don't eat anything. Like you mentioned, some people just they can only stomach juice and then trying to build up to that. And so overall, are there just any like for stress relief in general, like for those who overeat, those who undereat, and maybe even not just in the context of eating, just overall stress management tips for navigating these CPEs? Because we previously discussed what normal CPEs, how they are typically handled, where they're either on one extreme spectrum. So, kind of pointing students in a direction of where can they find themselves in the middle, depending on their starting point.
Absolutely. No, and that's a great way to think about it. Like understand where your starting point is, right? So if you are someone who, you get stressed out and tend to overeat, maybe, right, your next step is not just identifying that, but looking at the pattern of it, right? What triggers those things? What kind of foods are within your food environment? So not just like what's in your house or your apartment. Oh, my dog, sorry. Like you're like what foods are in your house or what foods are in your apartment. Like think about like, the vending machines that are close, the restaurants that are near, like anything that you have fairly immediate access to, like that's your food environment. And those are the choices that you're going to be making. So if you're an overeater, let's try to at least improve the food environment that you can, right? So the foods that are right in the mini fridge, in your house, in the apartment, like whatever it is. Um, let's try to balance those as best you can. So not to say that like you could like I don't know, never have a Pop Tart or something like that ever again, but like let's not have four boxes stocked and ready. Let's have one in the apartment and then let's also have like if you have a mini fridge, like get some carrots and hummus or like, some berries. Like I know not everyone has like freezer ability. Like usually we just have like a mini fridge in the dorms, but like I know when I moved out of the dorms and had my own apartment, like it was a regular kitchen, like we had a freezer, like buying frozen fruits and vegetables, always cheaper and they always last longer. And you can usually find them on sale too and then stock up. So that's what we did. Like I always had a huge bag of frozen blueberries. I wouldn't let anyone touch them because they were like $8. But I ate handfuls of those religiously before my exams because the antioxidants, I was sure that was helping me. And so thinking about your food environment and trying to basically create as many good options for yourself as possible. I've seen people go overboard with this and say like no more, snack foods, no more junk food, whatever you're gonna call them, and like eliminate everything out of your house. And then look at the fridge and be like, well, I don't want to eat celery and peanut butter. I want something more substantial. And then, you leave the food environment, right? And you go track down these things. So find whatever the balance is going to be for you. There's no foods that are off limits. There's no foods that are really going to be so detrimental to you that you can't eat. So finding a balance in kind of like what you're craving, but also what's a nutrient dense foods we could have with it as well. So that's for our stressful overeaters. Our stressful undereaters. This is sometimes trickier because you have to find a way to get yourself to eat. So I had some student peers who they had iPhones before I did. And so they would set alarms in their phone and to remember to like eat a snack every like 2 or 3 hours. Which I thought was it wasn't whole meals, but at least like they were eating something. I actually had one friend, and this is sort of an odd story, but it does feel like comes to mind now. Before every test, their mother would send them $10, like a paper $10 in the mail, before every single test, so that they would go buy a Red Bull and like a big candy bar. And I was like, that can't be, I'm a dietetic student, like this can't be a good idea. What on earth is going on here? And they were like, oh yeah, I always get like nervous and lightheaded before my exams, like just like my mom did in college. So this is what she told me to do, and it works every time. I'm like, this is amazing. Like pre-game ritual, you're getting carbohydrates, you're getting caffeine. Like it's not ideal, but like they found what works very well for them. And it was actually funny that they did this because later, like I think it was like a year or something late, we did a project where you had to like interview a family member about something. And they interviewed their mother again for this, and she had found out later in life that she has like chronic low blood sugar. So I'm like, oh yeah, no wonder these things worked very well. You needed some sugar before, like that's why we're all feeling lightheaded. So that was cool that they actually like a year later like made that connection. Like, oh yeah, I probably have that too. Good genes. So that was that was a really cool one to kind of figure out. But yeah, all right. So if we're under eating before a test, finding foods that are a little bit more palatable can sometimes help too. Like usually we don't want to like mindlessly munch on something, but this is actually probably the type of person who wants to be able to do this because at least if you can get something, and even if it's like tortilla chips and salsa, like there's vegetables in salsa, if or even guacamole, right? You're getting avocados, that's omega 3s, like or maybe, maybe it's not maybe I don't know, like maybe you can get like some kind of like fruit mix or something like that, but finding foods that are sweeter or saltier or something that you can kind of like munch on while you're studying, it might not even be something that you really have to think about, but you can incorporate in that environment so that you are still kind of like eating something, or like popcorn even, like just to be able to get something kind of in your system. Your brain really does want that consistent supply of glucose. So to be able to be eating something, even if it's snacking throughout the day, like yes, we would love to have like 3 balanced meals from the dining hall. That would be wonderful. But if that's not feasible, think about what's the closest thing to it, right? So even if you can be snacking throughout the day and still get a lot of those food groups, but maybe in a different order or something like that, that's pretty close. And that's really all we're aiming for is like close enough, because I think a lot of times we talk about like what perfect eating or ideal eating looks like, and there really isn't one, right? It's different for every person. We all respond to foods differently. So finding different tricks that kind of work best for you and utilizing kind of your own intuitive eating and listening to those hunger cues, like that's going to be best for you. Sometimes too, actually staying hydrated helps with hunger as well. Sometimes when we're dehydrated, that hunger cue goes away a little bit. So
Mhm.
sometimes pairing that, right, making sure we're hydrated throughout the day, that can help, even if you're just like snacking on popcorn.
No, yeah, that's a lot of great just kind of guidance for literally any student at any point, where it's if you stress eat, if you stress don't eat. And again, I like how we're introducing a topic in a conversation that's finally geared towards here's how to not treat the students, but here's how students can take care of themselves. Like it's not
Yes.
just you're being taught to treat other people. I think this episode really helps lay the groundwork for in order to take care of others, you have to take care of yourself. And also changing the framework as to what, like, I hope with people listening moving forward, they're thinking about what CPEs they have coming up and how best they can prepare outside of just studying 6 hours straight, and looking at more so to take care of yourself during that preparation instead of just, slamming three energy drinks and then hoping for the best. While caffeine is helpful, you've I think added a lot of great nuance to things that we already know, where it's like, yeah, caffeine stimulates your brain, but also the cycling off, where it's like, yeah, we know how to have a balanced plate, but eating consistently throughout the day, not just having one giant meal, and then also eating consistently or supplying yourself consistently with the things during your test or your cognitive performance experience with when you're studying. And so finding ways to pair, find commonalities. And I think ultimately what it sounds like is just causing the least disruption to your brain and your body's metabolism as much as possible. So like kind of aiming for that consistency. But is there any like final words, piece of advice, things that you'd want students to know when it comes to just handling these stressful exams, stressful presentations, just stressful types of experiences in their curriculum, or just any lasting words on this topic for them?
I think sometimes, especially in the world of performance nutrition, sports nutrition, there is an element of like your body is the business card, which I really, really hate. And I think it's changing a little bit, but there's still very much an element of that to it. And so I want to tell, anyone who thinks that they need to eat in a certain way or change their body or have a certain body composition, um, your brain doesn't want that. Your brain wants to stay in its homeostasis. Like it does not want to, it does not want to lose fat. It doesn't want to lose muscle. It doesn't want to lose it. It wants to retain everything exactly how it is. So if you ever come across like that diet culture, someone like in the back of your mind telling you eat, like it's okay, we're skipping a meal, we'll lose weight, or it's okay that we didn't eat today and we just had coffee, like never is it okay to not fuel your body and your brain. If we have, right, any of those body composition changes, like those types of goals, we want to do it in a not starving our body way. And we have seen in studies time and time again, right? When you skip meals and when you create that, like that severe calorie deficit, right? Thinking that you are going to lose body weight, we end up doing so much more harm than good. We lose muscle mass, we risk bone loss, like we're increased risk for injuries. So many other things can happen, and your brain will be it's so much more likely or so much higher risk for things like mood swings and anxiety and things like that. It just absolutely amplifies the problem. So if that is, the target, which is perfectly fine, it's perfectly fine to have body composition, goals, absolutely. But I hope that no one is feeling the pressure that they have to do that. If you do on your own motivation would like to do that, I hope that we're doing it in a very healthful way by fueling the mind and body and eating meals per day and choosing lean proteins and high fiber and all of the things, because that is going to make such a healthier impact on your brain than it is to, write off skipping meals because you think you're going to lose weight over it. That is something that I come across unfortunately too often in practice, is people think like, oh, well, I'm trying to lose weight anyway, so it's fine that I skip lunch. Your brain is so unhappy about that. So if anyone has, one last thought here is please just do the very best you can to eat enough throughout the day. That is one of the very best things that we can do to take care of our brains and really create less of a stressful environment for it.
I think that is, yes, such great words to end on, especially the like wanting to go away from the body business card and going more towards to the mind and the personality and the person that you bring being the business card, where it's you need to have your brain functioning optimally. And I think especially in the dietetic space, nutrition space, those are absolutely great words to have students here going through the process. So thank you so much, Dr. Stedman, for actually like helping students in ways that they can help be the best student that they can be, the best person that they can be to properly nourish themselves. And when it comes to what another episode that we'll be working on, we're going to talk about carving out your niche. So we talked a little bit with Dr. Stedman in the first episode about kind of how she made her own cognitive performance kind of expertise and how she kind of went through that whole process. So the next episode that we want to go over is kind of now looking more towards that career development. So we wanted to have an episode dedicated to taking care of students and finding ways to make sure that you guys can nourish yourselves. And then the last or the third episode will kind of cover ways that you can really step your career forward in making dietetics truly your own. So thank you so much again, Dr. Stedman, and we're excited to have you again in the future.
Thank you so much. I will talk to you next time.